Weird apartment. When I was 20 years old, I was working nights and renting a room in an apartment with a girl 1 year older than me from the same restaurant. It was close to downtown and the rent was a reasonable 50,000 yen per month. The room was on the second floor of a 3-story reinforced concrete building, with a layout of 6 tatami Western-style room and 6 tatami Japanese-style room, with a 4.5 tatami kitchen and unit bath in between. The first day we moved in, I finished work around 1:30 a.m., but my mother was sick in bed with a cold, so I decided to go home that day. I sent only my roommate back to my apartment. My parents' house was rather close. The next day I returned to my apartment in the afternoon, but something was wrong with my roommate. She wouldn't get out of her bed in her room, the Western room. When I asked her why, she said that she had heard a strange crunching sound coming from my room, Japanese-style room, from last night until this morning. She was so frightened that I examined every inch of the Japanese-style room. And I reassured her with a reasonable answer, "It's a mouse." But she developed a fever that day and became bedridden. I left her at the apartment and went out to work at night. I returned to my apartment around 2 o'clock that day, but she was acting strange again. Just like last night, she was freaking out about the noises coming from my room. I was sure there were strange noises, but I was drunk and went to bed without a care in the world. On the morning of the 8th day like that, I was sleepwalking, thinking it was kind of noisy outside, when the doorbell of my house rang violently. What is it so early in the morning? I looked through the peephole and found a police identification card. The police report said that the person who lived right above our room had died. I don't know how long he had been dead until the autopsy results come back, but from the looks of it, it couldn't have been more than 10 days or so. The landlord said we have 2 months' worth of rent. I feel bad. When my roommate found out, she left without saying whether or not. She was not feeling well and stopped coming to the store. I thought about going back to my parents' house because my mother was worried about me, but I thought it might be nice to live alone, so I decided not to move. After a few months of uneventful life, I got a boyfriend and immediately invited him to my house. We were semi-living together and he was staying with us quite often, but one day he suddenly said with a serious face, "Why don't you move? There's a strange noise coming from the Japanese-style room, which I used to use as a bedroom." Again. And I said, "Oh, I think there's a mouse." He said, "No, it's not. It sounds like teeth grinding." Inwardly I was more scared of what he was saying than of the sound of it. After that, he stopped coming to our house and I went back to living alone again. I didn't hear that grinding noise every day. One day I came home at midnight as usual and was lounging around in my Western-style room reading a comic book. Then I heard my neighbor making a noise. But I was sure the room next door was empty. I leaned over the balcony to take a peek at my neighbor, but there were no curtains on the window, and it didn't look like anyone had moved in. But I could hear voices. And it sounded like a woman's moan. Ha-en. Some brat is sneaking in and having sex with me, right? I thought I would scare him a little. I was drunk. I threw what looked like a piece of plastic that had fallen on the balcony, lightly, you know, at the window of the next room. I hid myself. I heard a thud and the woman's voice suddenly stopped, and then I heard a giggle, from near the next window. I heard a strange sound that I had never heard before. Was it a voice rather than a sound? I was so slow that I couldn't move while squatting on the balcony. I was in a cold sweat and my heart was racing. I had a feeling that the voice, I had heard coming from the room next door had somehow appeared on the balcony next door, even though there was no sign of a window being opened. I kept still with my breath in my throat. The window, at the entrance to the balcony, the lower half of the window was made of glass. The lower half of the window is made of glass with a grayish-gray surface, and the upper half of the window is made of ordinary clear glass. I looked at the clear glass in my room. Then I saw something black and crushed at a fairly high position in the picture. Hair? The back of her head. But there's no body. I was so terrified that I had a vivid imagination and all sorts of creepy things were going through my mind. The image on the window pane was still and motionless, but then it suddenly tilted at an angle, as if it was tilting its head. As if it was tilting its head. At that moment, I screamed and rolled into my room, locked the door tightly, closed the curtains, crawled into my bedroom bed, and pretended to be asleep. There was no way I could sleep that day. I covered myself head to toe with the futon, covered my ears, and stayed up until morning. The next day, as the sun was getting higher in the sky, I wondered if last night's horror was just a misunderstanding. I called the landlord. Someone may have broken into the vacant room next door and played a prank. The landlord arrived early and was checking out the neighbors. But the door was locked, and there was no sign of a broken window. The landlord didn't like it very much. I forced him to show me the inside of the house. The landlord looked pretty uncomfortable. I was horrified when I entered. There are countless dead insects hanging from the walls of our western room and the adjacent room, entangled in something that looks like spider silk. What is it? They look like small cockroaches. The landlord was dismayed and said, "I cleaned the room properly." I thought about telling him what happened last night, but I knew he wouldn't believe me, and I was afraid he would be offended if I told him I saw something that looked like a ghost. So, I sealed up last night's incident. Then another couple of months went by without incident, until one day I came home from work and the front porch was flooded. There was a black crack running from the ceiling light at the entrance to the middle of the kitchen ceiling. Water was pouring down from there. Is there a hole or leak in the plumbing? Ha ha ha, was it a defective house? Drunk, I walked briskly across the soaked floor, dodging the water falling from above, and entered the bathroom. Then I couldn't believe my eyes. The lid of the toilet bowl was broken. It was cracked right down the middle and split in half. Even I, an optimistic person, was scared, an intruder. I was scared. I took the iron pipe in the bedroom and checked inside the closet. But of course, nobody was there. The next day I called the landlord and explained the situation, and he immediately sent a plumber. He said that nothing was damaged as a result of his investigation. Even if there was damage, the structure of this apartment building would not allow water to leak in our room unless the occupant directly above us used water. The one directly above us, though, has been empty ever since the previous occupant was found dead. The construction workers had few words and left quickly. The cracks in the ceiling and the toilet lid were repaired free of charge by courtesy of the landlord. The landlord kindly repaired the crack in the ceiling and the lid of the toilet for free. The landlord gave us a discount of 1 month's rent to pay for the shoes and clothes that somehow got wet. Ladies and gentlemen, I am an idiot and I lived in that apartment for the rest of my life without leaving it. I am a fool at heart and optimistic. I have lived there for 4 years, and although there have been many minor weirdnesses, I will tell you why I decided to move out. On that day, 3 of my classmates from high school came to visit. 2 of them had gone to Tokyo after graduating from high school, so we didn't get a chance to see each other very often. But I had to work at night. I left my 3 friends in my room and went to work, and around 10 p.m. I received a phone call from them at the store. "I'm going home tonight." The 3 of them were warmly chatting on the kotatsu in the Western-style room when they heard an unpleasant noise coming from the Japanese-style bedroom. Again. I thought, "It's rats," and told them. But they said, "It's not like that, it's more like clawing noises." They did not listen to me at all anymore. Moreover, when the 3 of us headed to the bedroom to investigate the origin of the sound, we found that the mysterious phenomenon had occurred in the western room. Suddenly, they heard a banging sound on the wall. The 3 of them couldn't stand it any longer. The 3 of them couldn't stand it any longer and left without saying whether they wanted to or not. They left the spare key in the mailbox. After hearing such a story, I was in no mood to go back to my apartment, so I went back to my parents' house that day. The next day during the day, I returned to my apartment to clean up the mess my friends had made last night and prepare for the night, when I noticed a change in my health. I had a fever of about 38 degrees Celsius. But it was Saturday and I couldn't take a day off from work, so I managed to get some work done. After work, I went back to my apartment, but my fever was high and my body ached, so I called my mother to come over. It is a strange thing, but when my mother is around, I feel relieved even though I have a fever and am in pain. As I was falling asleep with my mother watching over me, I suddenly heard a woman screaming outside, "Kya!" A woman screamed outside. Then I heard a woman running down the stairs at a very fast pace. Thinking something was wrong, I jumped out of bed to go to the front door to see what was going on outside. But my mother said, "Don't go. Stay here." She grabbed my arm and wouldn't let go. I had thoughts in my head about molesters, underwear droppers, and assaulting people, but as a mother, I guess she didn't want her daughter to be involved in anything out of the ordinary. She didn't let go of my arm until I calmed down. At the time, I thought my mother was a heartless person, but I was wrong. My mother testified that when I heard her screams and jumped out of bed, she didn't hear anything. She said that I suddenly jumped up, grabbed the iron pipe I keep under the bed for self-defense, and tried to leave the room. So my mother stopped me. The next day I went to the upper floor. The room directly above mine was still empty. I asked the people in the surrounding rooms, "Did something happen last night?" I asked them. I heard a terrible noise in the middle of the night, but they gave me a very suspicious look. What was it? I decided to move out. I reported to my landlord that I was moving out. I heard these words: "You are the only one who has lived here this long, 4 years." It seems that the apartment was very busy with people coming and going. And then there's this. The room directly above was remodeled after the death, but it was sealed off for some reason because it was bad for the next renter who didn't know what was going on. It's been 4 years now, so it's time to look for a tenant. But the other day, I called a contractor to check the condition of the tatami mats in the Japanese-style room, and he found a lot of scratches on the back side of the tatami mats. Even though no one lives there. After all, it would be better not to rent that room to anyone, right? The landlord said quite timidly. Did he open his heart to me who had been reluctantly residing here? He also told me about the neighbor of the room I was renting. The man ran away and the woman lived alone for a while, but one day she disappeared, leaving all her household goods behind. By the way, the previous occupant of the room I rented, who also worked at night, apparently cut his wrist a lot and made a mess in the bathtub, and disappeared. I was liked by the landlord because not many people seem to leave in a proper way. If you want to rent the apartment, just let me know. So I took advantage of his kindness and waived the security deposit, guarantor, and parking fee, and now my sister, also a Mizu, is living in the apartment. And she lives next door to me. Yakuza and woman disappeared. Room of dead insects. So far nothing seems to be going on. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.